who is not just thanking me for taking this debate, but also thanking you for having this debate. In democracies, conflicts are not resolved by threats and acts of violence. In democracies, conflicts are resolved by discussions and debates. No one should ever feel intimidated when speaking out. And no one should feel scared when reporting in the media. The Commission condemns any kind, and let me stress that, any kind, no matter the form it might take, where it might occur, or against whom it might be perpetrated. Now, it is for Member States to investigate individual cases of violence in accordance with their national law, of course in line with the rule of law and our common values. But when it comes to protecting free and open discussion and debate and the safety and security of political candidates and elected representatives, the Commission is not standing on the sidelines. Rising tensions and increasing polarization have exposed political candidates and elected representatives to threats and acts of violence, online and offline, impacting those at heightened risk of discrimination the most. And women in particular are a target. This reduces democratic representation, undermines trust in our democratic institutions, and so erodes the very foundation of democracy itself. Since the very beginning of Commissioner McGrath's career as a local politician, he has learned firsthand that democracy is for everyone, and so it needs to include everyone. And that is why the Commission is doubling down on democracy under the European Democracy Shield. Free and fair elections are fundamental to democracy, and we're acting under the shield to support Member States and ensure their integrity. And we will also support an open and safe environment for political candidates and representatives to perform their democratic role. Back in 2023, the Commission's recommendations on inclusive and resilient elections called on Member States and political parties, foundations and campaign organizations to refrain from promoting stereotypes, discriminatory statements, and biases against specific groups. Under the European Democracy Shield, we're now working towards a Commission recommendation on safety in politics. And this work is drawing on EU rules and tools in various areas and will build on best practices. But safety in politics will not be achieved by institutional or legislative acts alone. What it requires is common effort. And this is why the Commission supports voluntary commitments from all stakeholders, such as pledges and codes of conduct to foster best practice. A notable example is the Code of Conduct for the 2024 European Parliament elections. And this followed the 2023 Commission recommendation on elections and was signed by all European political parties and some national political parties as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the need for a collective effort is also why the Shield highlights a whole-of-government approach and a whole-of-society approach. The Commission counts on the support and also on the active involvement of all Member States and all their authorities, EU institutions, political parties, and relevant stakeholders like yourself. And that is why we're looking very much forward to the exchange of today. Thank you.
Now we move to the round of interventions on behalf of the political groups and on behalf of the EPP group, Monsieur Bellamy, pour 2 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire.
President, Commissioner. Quentin was 23 years old and he was murdered, Quentin Deronc. It wasn't an accident, it's obviously tragic, and we think about his friends and family, but first and foremost, this is a symptom of a greater evil, and this is an evil that is spread by the far left. They have never renounced totalitarianism, and they think it's okay to kill in order to do away with truths that they don't want to be reminded of. There was a message published on Quentin Deronck last week, which someone's going to have to take responsibility for. There's also a slogan that appeared on the walls of Sciences Po University in Paris: save a friend, shoot down Quentin. So there are various people who've been threatened by the far left. Yanis Roda as well, for example. Klaus Kinsler, he is now under police protection because he said something at the University of Grenoble. So there are targets everywhere. They say they're anti-fascist, but they're actually fascists, because that's what we're talking about here, fascism. When a student can't go to lessons because they have a Jewish name, what are we talking about? Just near here, in October last year, in Strasbourg University, "Glory to Hamas" was written on a wall. What does that mean? You have groups saying that they want feminist organizations to be dissolved. These are licenses to kill. And after Quentin had been killed, Jean-Luc Mélenchon spoke of his affection for the Young Guard, which was a dissolved anti-fascist organization whose members then killed Quentin Deronck. So what are we talking about here? I mean, when George Floyd died, you got through a resolution that talked about the structural racism of police forces in Europe. Can you today definitively, members of this House, break with this far left? You should stand with us to criticise this increasing violence, because that's where the danger to democracy lies today. Thank you.
The next speaker on behalf of the S&D Group, Mr. Matiasek.
Thank you, President. 2024, I was attacked by people from the right-wing scene in my country, so I'm not going to be silent in this debate on political violence. Nothing justifies an attack on your political opponent. No self-justice. Yes, there is political violence in different places, but if you take a look at the far right, then this belongs to part of their ideology. Figures from Germany since 1990, then quite a few people have lost their lives to far-right violence, from Hanau, Munich and Halle, and the CDU politician Walter Lübcke was assassinated. The world vision of the far right is based on inequality of people, and when this leads to a fight between the different peoples, then you get violence. And it's perpetrated by the far right, then there's no emancipation. Everybody has to be able to express their opinion free of fear, free from fear to be attacked, to be killed, of violence. And that freedom is threatened. And those who shout the loudest are the ones who perhaps should think more carefully about this.
Speaker, Monsieur Leguéry, pour le groupe des Patriotes.
La violence politique extrême.
The political violence of the extreme left is a reality, and a reality that kills. I'm thinking of Quentin in France, who died from blows of the French militants, and we see them represented in the far left in this house here as well. There are people who have paid with their lives, their blood, simply for expressing a different opinion. Here in the European Parliament, there was a minute of silence promised for Quentin, but it was never respected. This hemicycle protects certain violent militants. The Italian MEP who was convicted in Hungary. Nevertheless, the Parliament voted against lifting her immunity. I'm also thinking of another French MEP who talked about the Nemesis Collective. People need to be protected in France now if they want to protest. Young people want to protest, but they do it at the risk of their own safety. My party, Rassemblement National, has had a number of attacks against our members in recent years. So when you preach this kind of hate, you end up with blood on your hands.
La prochaine intervention au nom du groupe des conservateurs, Madame Marion Maréchal. 2 minutes.
L'extrême gauche tue.
The far left kills. A month ago, Quentin Deronck was killed in France Charlie Kirk a little while earlier. The far left intimidates, beats people up, threatens. It even then transforms its victims into the guilty, because in their view, everyone on the right should be subject to this violence. A good fascist is a dead fascist, is what they say. And this is something that takes place right across Europe. There's a whole network of people, a kind of anti-fascist circular economy. The far left attacks, and then left-wing media, often funded by public funding, excuses what they've done. And then you have left-wing activists who produce biased studies, and then France Unbowed, the left-wing party in France, applauds. And then the circle continues, because the far left is a doctrine that people take on. You have a Swedish activist, Thomas Malm, who celebrated the 7th of October attacks and says that violence is necessary. In France, 80% of political violence was caused by the far left. According to Europol, 21 attacks can be attributed to the far left, almost as many as Islamic Jihad. And this left-wing violence is being exported. The member, Mr. Arnaud, was present in a demonstration in Italy that led to violence against the Brothers of Italy. And then there was another event in Turin, and there was violence there. So shame to those who voted for Mr. Arnaud and Rima Hassan, who continue to defend the Young Guard, this banned militia. Shame on you, Mr. Mélenchon, as well, who seems to be excusing violence and the killing of Quentin Derenc. These are terrorist organizations.
On behalf of Renew Europe, Mr. Moritz Görend.
Dear colleagues, if political violence comes at the cost of people's lives, then we have to speak out very clearly. The murder of Quentin Derenc is despicable, full stop. Nothing, no ideology, no political objective, and no alleged fight against the system justifies violence against people. It's as simple as that. And this, I think, brings us to the crux of the debate. Extremism destroys democracy, and it always does. And what we are hearing from both sides, the reproaches, the accusations from both sides, highlight the problem. Extremism, whether it's from the far left or from the far right, or religious fanaticism. If anybody believes that they want to defend open society by fighting violence, so then through violence, they haven't understood anything. Democracy is based on divisions of opinion, passionate discussions. But when the moment comes and you see your political opponent as an enemy, that is when political violence starts. And we as liberals are against any form of extremism. Open society is something that we need to defend. And we have to discuss. We have to have disputes, but not thump somebody. We have to discuss, but not terrorize. We have to defend open society against extreme violence, whether it comes from the far right, the far left, or religion. And this is something I think that we have to say very clearly.
Next speaker, on behalf of the Green Group, Monsieur David Cormont.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Dear colleagues, now the debate, the title of the debate is an insult to our continent, the history of our continent, to violence of our continent. The violence systematically comes from one side, and it is from the extreme right. À Lyon, the town where Quentin Derenc was killed, we have seen a number of attacks there from the far right. One dead a year over the last 50 years. That is caused by the far right. On the list of the Rassemblement National, 200 candidates were identified as being part of radical organizations, or they committed violence themselves, or spoke homophobic or racist words. The reality is that you are this violence. You have asked for this debate But really, it's the friends of Mr. Bellamy, the right, who once again are bowing down to the extreme right. And it makes sense because Mr. Bellamy, between Macron and Le Pen, voted for the extreme right. This collusion we can see here as well. So let me say to you calmly, looking you in the eyes, we will not be divided in the face of the threat that you pose and your behaviour. As you bow down to your future allies, we remain standing and proud. That is the history of this continent. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, chers collègues, please, of course, respect the speakers, as the speakers have respected you, and respect the House. It's for everyone. Huh? So let's move towards the next speakers. And now, on behalf of the left group, Madame Rima Hassan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Well, the rise of fascism is the result of political choices. There's nothing predetermined about it. As we all know, history does not write itself. It depends on people's actions. But recently in the media we've seen values being overturned. According to the right, at the far right, it's the left who are involved in violence, but figures show things differently. 96% of political murders since the 1990s have been caused by the far right. Far right terrorist attacks have increased by 320% across Western countries. Violence, which kills and injures people, comes first and foremost from the far right, and it's something that affects us because of who we are. This is part of an ideological ecosystem, and the far right in this House represent the institutional part of that. We're talking about Nazism and fascism. It's at the doors of power everywhere in Europe. We will continue to fight it, and we will make no compromises. Just a wide-ranging anti-fascist, anti-racist front defending a solidarity-based, equality-based civil society can save us. It is people who make history. We are anti-fascist, and we will remain so. Thank you.
So on behalf of the ESN group, Madam Dajowskowska-Hernik-Ewa.
Charlie Kirk, 31-year-old who defended our values, was shot during a public presentation, and only because he had conservative views. And then, of course, we had the brutal attack on Quentin Deronck, and a former assistant of a left-wing MP was one of those involved. We can see that around the world the right wing is being dehumanized, and their values don't count. And even when it comes to the murder of a right-wing activist, this isn't really properly valued for what it is, and we don't have rulings from the courts. You talk about respect and tolerance, and then you attack conservatives in a vulgar way. You should be ashamed. You must be extremely unhappy people. I think people can see your hypocrisy, your misogyny, your aggression, your hate, and hopefully you will be held account for this in the next elections.
So we finish with a round of speakers on behalf of political groups. We open also the blue card procedure, and the next speaker is Mr. Thomas Tobbe.
Den politiska debatten i
The political debate in Europe can sometimes be tough, but it should never go to violence or threats. Unfortunately, we have seen many cases of violence against political representatives that cross the line. We've seen this in my country, in Sweden. The migration minister, for example, was threatened. we see the threats and conflation with the far right or Hitler. And we saw those threats from somebody in the Swedish Left Party. This is completely unacceptable. Any kind of threats or violence, whether it comes from the right or the left, is completely unacceptable in a democracy. But every time we talk about the actions of the left-wing activists, we see protests from this side of the chamber. It seems they're never willing to point the fingers when it is their side which is responsible or spreading anti-Semitism. Enough is enough.
Next speaker, Mr. Matthias Nemes.
Spoštovani visoki colleagues, allow me to begin with a bit of irony. Today we are discussing extreme left-wing violence at a time when it's the extreme right, the one undermining the foundations of democracy and the international order. It is creating a political atmosphere where there's a lot of division, exclusion, and attacks on diversity. This has become commonplace. The ideas of the left, solidarity, equality, and dignity for all, are often the target of attacks. In Slovenia, the Social Democrats set up an exhibition of gender equality, and this was demolished on the very same day. Such actions are the result of the values advocated by the extreme right wing. When we talk about this, I cannot ignore the policies exemplified by Trump and Netanyahu. Trump's administration is undermining American institutions, and it's also threatening world peace and international order without any serious consequences. Unfortunately, even in Europe, there are parties that openly admire such policies. So let's be honest, the problem is not solidarity or equality. It is politics that uses hatred as a political tool. And this is what we should be discussing today. Thank you very much.
Madam Marieke Ellers.
Terwijl in dit parlement iedereen rechts van het...
Yes, thank you very much. In this parliament, anybody who's right of centre is deemed to be a fascist. And the radical left have killed a 23-year-old in the street. And then in the Netherlands, right-wing politicians and their families are intimidated. Mr. Fontaine was shot by a left-wing activist who is now free, and Geert Wilders for very many years had to live at a safe address with protection. There are examples across Europe of people like this, and this is a sign of our times. You always complain about far right extremism, but don't recognise it within your own ranks. You say you are tolerant, but you don't seem to tolerate any other opinions. Democracy cannot survive if one side is always being demonized and the other side is always being allowed to speak freely. The anti-fascist activists seem to enjoy impunity. That's what they feel. This cannot continue in this House either.
Mr. Anthony Smith, would you like to take it? Mr. Smith, 456.
Federico Martin Aramburu, Eric Casado Lopez, Mamadou Cissé, Angela Rostas, Jamel Benjabela, Rojdi Laksassi, Hichem Miraoui, Aboubakar Cissé. Voilà les noms.
This is a list of names of the people who have been killed in France in 2022. You are killers from the extreme right, and we will continue to fight you.
So please, first of all, there is a blue card procedures, and when I kindly ask you to interrupt because there is no interpretation, you have to wait for the interpretation, sir. So it's, yeah. No, it was not a blue card. So if you want to reply or you don't want to reply.
It just proves my point that you think the rules apply to us but not to you. You did not ask me a question. You do not deserve an answer, but I'm happy to have given you your 30 seconds of speaking time. Have a nice evening.
So, Also, this is valid for all speakers in any session. No, there are specific rules on how we can address colleagues, and I take note of how colleagues have been addressed too. So we also forward this to the President. So we move to the next speaker, Signore Carlo Fidanza.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. There's a concerning red thread which links far-left terrorists right across Europe. At the beginning of January, there were anti-fascist demonstrations in Rome, and there were Italian colleagues there, but also Mr. Arnaud, who was the leader of this Jeune Garde, or Young Guard, this anti-fascist organisation. And then a foreign group beat some Italians up. And then, just a few weeks later, Quentin Durunk was killed, probably by the same people. We're talking here of people who belonged to this Jeune Guard, the Young Guard, including an assistant of Mr. Arnaud. So we have seen all too often recently far-left attacks. Let's look at what happened in Turin, where dozens of police officers were injured, one of who was beaten using hammers while he was down on the ground. Now, this is the new version of the kind of violence we saw all too often in the 1970s. There was the famous German hammer band as well, which produced so many victims right across Europe, including the victims in Budapest in 1923. Our colleague Ilaria Saris was arrested during those events, and shamefully, her parliamentary immunity wasn't waived. Now, these aren't errors. These aren't the kinds of things that happen on a one-off basis. These are ferocious and coordinated attacks being carried out by terrorist methods. This militant anti-fascism needs to be dealt with severely in a unanimous manner. We need to boost cooperation between European police forces and Europol. We need to put Antifa on the list of terrorist organisations. Thank you.
Next speaker, Alexandra Giese, for 1 minute.
In Deutschland. Thank you. In Germany, nearly 3 times as many political acts of violence are carried out by far-right activists than far-left activists. And they're more ready to be violent. And the death ratio is 50-1, as Ms. Eckert has said, and violence is on the increase. Perpetrators ever younger, and far-right groups today are recruiting children and young people for terrorist attacks and even online. Young people are approached on platforms like Steam, Twitch or Discord. And then we have algorithms on X, TikTok and Instagram, intentionally playing for far-right content, hate and violence more than other content. This is a business model that financially rewards influencers for right-wing content and punishes voices in favour of democracy. We have to act against this. Anybody wanting to fight real extremism should focus on algorithms which allows people to make a conscious choice as to what they want to see on internet, because at the moment it's dictated to us by Hitler admirers like Elon Musk or Trump fans like Mark Zuckerberg.
Madam Giese, there is a blue card. Would you like to take it? From Mr. Thomas Freilich, 362. So let's wait for interpretation also in the same time.
Ja, vielen Dank, dass Sie die Frage.
Well, yes, thank you for taking my question. I think in spite of our political differences, we can agree that physical violence shouldn't be part of political debate. Last year, 89 violent crimes took place in Germany against the elected representatives of elected parties. The AfD was attacked 68 times, whereas all other attacks on parties were in single figures. So we are the party that is attacked physically most often, and it's generally by far-left activists with who the Greens sympathise.
I condemn any form of political violence, even those acts against the AfD. And if I were to try and explain this, the AfD does provoke a lot of people with their extreme hate. You know, of course, that I belong to a group, the Greens, which suffers a lot of political violent acts, and we have to be protected by the police because we are threatened permanently by far-right activists.
We move to the next speaker, Madam Irene Montero. So, colleagues, the debate is taking place here. Madam Irene Montero.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, President. People of the extreme right, people of Vox, you have been talking about the Reconquista, about the greatness of the Spanish kings, using this type of rhetoric, calling for hate and violence against migrants, against feminists, against trans people, justifying the genocide in Palestine, bombing girls in Iran. And now, when it comes to defending Spain and Europe from Trump's threats, when you have to defend people from illegal wars waged by Israel and the US, when it comes to rising energy prices and bills, when companies are making record profits, when you have to be patriotic, where is your bravura and your heroism? You are putting yourselves on the side of a man who's bombing half the world in the name of business. Can you perhaps explain to the Spaniards, to the Europeans, how you defend Spain and Europe by supporting Donald Trump? Your only patriotic loyalty is to money.
Next speaker, Madam Mary Khan.
Ja, Linksextremismus.
Yes, well, left-wing extremism is one of the greatest dangers we now have to our democracies. And these are structures that are organized and act in a militant manner. They attack people with hammers, etc. In France, Quentin Duranc was beaten to death, and other attacks have taken place elsewhere. As my colleague said, 70% of violence in Germany against politicians is carried out against the AfD. Mrs. Geyser couldn't answer that question, and this violence isn't only against so-called right-wingers, it's now carried out on people who just don't agree with the far left. Even Mrs. Schwarz, who is an icon in Germany, was attacked, and that shows how radical these people are. These structures are set up to so-called fight the right, and basically we want to see the speaker is cut off.
Khan, you have a blue card from Ms. Demirel. Please wait for interpretation. Could you... Okay?
Dankeschön, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much for allowing the question. Now, the big problem is Hitler as the bad guy. You're saying who is judging the AfD. This is people from your party, people who are willing to act violently. You have never taken responsibility for Hannah or other attacks, people who were murdered in Germany. You distance yourself from these types of statements which are made.
The reply.
Speaker's cut off.
Okay, well, the Hitler quote, to begin with, I mean, obviously I distance myself from that kind of thing. You know, it's simply not true. But as I said, 70% of attacks against politicians are carried out on those from the AfD, even in local elections. The anti-fascists attacked the houses of local politicians during local elections. There's a campaign in Bavaria where that happened. So every party conference there are protests against the AfD, and as I said, even an icon like Alice Schwarzer has come under attack. attack. Thank you.
Mr. Lukas Zieper.
Ich werde auf Deutsch sprechen.
I'm going to be speaking in German. Dear people of Europe, Danger Dan, one of the German singers said, if you cannot tackle violence through peace, then the only thing left is militancy. I think this is perhaps what a lot of left-wing activists have. They can't really tackle right-wing violence. There's this hate-filled speech as well. But I think you're wrong, because our democracy is working. It is alive, and it is defending itself in a peaceful fashion. In the European Union, political violence is always wrong, regardless of against whom it's perpetrated. But let us not deceive ourselves about something. If our democracy is going to be removed by any kind of extremism, it doesn't matter which side, we'll take up the weapons and we'll fight for Europe so that people can live in peace, even if our opinion is different.
Next speaker, Mr. Henrik Dahl.
Tak for ordet.
Thank you. On Saturday, a young campaigner from the Danish Social Democratic Youth was attacked in Denmark while hanging up election posters. He ended up in the hospital, and according to himself, the perpetrators were Antifa members from the far left wing. Fortunately, that act has been condemned by representatives across the political spectrum, and that's extremely important, because when young people choose to participate in a political campaign and you attack it, it's an attack on democracy. But we have to be honest, political violence doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes because of radicalization, and these recent years we've seen radicalization really picking up the pace here in Europe. We see Islamic violent groups sort of mixing with others, and the result is not just violence, it's a normalization of violence. It's the rhetoric being used which is being changed now, where we don't see political opponents, we see enemies. And the things that we are seeing now on the streets of Europe is absolutely terrible. It's sort of a European version of the Islamism, and they're only being helped by the useful idiots on the far left. We have to stop this development, because once political violence becomes normalized, we all lose. Thank you.
Next speaker, Madam Sandra Gomez-Lopez.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, President. To be very clear, from our political group, we condemn all types of violence, wherever it might come from. However, we cannot allow reality to be manipulated. 85% of cases of political violence come from groups linked to the extreme right. And we see this very clearly in Spain, where we see a very hostile campaign against the left and women in particular. A socialist woman, a colleague of mine, was punched when she was simply exercising her right to political representation. And it was a journalist accredited by the Popular Party who didn't want to condemn this attack. We have a member, Mrs. Montero, who had to ask for protection because she received death threats because she was a woman from the left, which is something that obviously upsets you. So if we talk about political violence in this party, let's start by changing the title and talk about where the violence really comes from. Thank you.
Ms. Gomez, you have a blue card from Madam Zajostkowska. 361. Would you like to take it? Yeah. We move to the next, is the right of each speaker to take or not blue cards. Huh? We move to the next speaker, Tom van den Driessen.
Voorzitter, collega's, Antifa is geen normale linkse protestbeweging. Het is een...
Colleagues, Antifa is not a normal left-wing protest movement. It is an international network which is protected and funded internationally, and they fight against the globalised world, and they try and intimidate people at the national level and attack them just because they have a different opinion from theirs. Racists, fascists, they're the labels they place on us. And this discourse is tolerated, even though people are sometimes killed. Charlie Kirk, Quentin Durant, for example. The left has blood on its hands, but it continues to distract attention. And I think this really shows the situation that we're in. This Antifa organisation is on no terrorist list. But what we do need to do is reveal their sources of funding, because those who defend Antifa today are involved in violence.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, what the left-wing activists did in the streets of Lyon is shameful for the whole of Europe. A student was murdered merely because he tried to defend women who were protesting against violence from immigrants. This is not an isolated incident. If we take a look at the report of organisations that are fighting terrorism, clearly show that left-wing extremism is a real systemic and growing problem in Europe. And on the extreme left wing, we've seen that people are called nationalist or fascist, and this is a very sick kind of logic which can kill. And in Poland, we also have a similar problem. Left-wing militants and activists are attacking religious people and right-wing people, and they attack anybody. And this is because of the way in which mainstreaming is being accepted, and Europe cannot be silent on this.
Madam Susanna Borvendek.
In this chamber, conservative politicians are labelled as Nazis without any consequences, while the crimes of the far left are excused. This is where Liaria Salis got refuge and has been protected ever since. A person who, armed with hammers and vipers, attacked and beat innocent passerbys from behind. It took a tragedy for us to finally say there are MEPs on the left who hold extreme views and who relativize murder by equating anti-fascism with democracy. Of course, what can we expect from a movement that was launched by Stalin and continues to incite hatred against those who have different views? We demand that Antifa be declared a terrorist organization and that an investigation be launched into whether the EU has provided any support to far-left organizations. And enough of stigmas. When respect for life and tradition and protection of normality are called Nazism, that's hate speech.
Merci, Président, Monsieur le Commissaire. Les groupes...
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. The ultra-violent left-wing groups infiltrate groups and institutions. They hide between masks. These ultra-right wings apologise for Islamism and shout out about Islamophobia to protect their alliances. But they're not happy to hide in the shadows anymore. The founder of the Jeune Garde, who was elected a member of the France Insoumise, is being investigated in the case of the Quentin's killing. We need to look at this connection between terrorism and extreme militants. I think there should be a European blacklist of ultra-violent organisations. This would be a tool to help police cooperation and investigations, to cut European funding to mediating structures and stop them operating transnationally. Europe can no longer be blind when it comes to these types of extreme violence. Thank you.
Next speaker, Signore Sandro Ruotolo.
Grazie, President. Thank you, President. Well, I must say that I actually share what the Commissioner said. Obviously, what's been said since then is quite another thing. Let me begin by saying that the murder of this right-wing activist in France is a very serious matter and should be condemned unambiguously. Political violence is never acceptable in a democracy, and those responsible need to be brought to justice. You can't have violence used for political propaganda purposes. It would take me more than an hour to tell you about all the right-wing crimes that have taken place in my country, Italy. Let me just say that there's a journalist who's living under police protection because they've been threatened by the far right. And in Europe, we're seeing movements that foster nationalism and ideological radicalism increasing in strength. And this feeds into public debate and increases the risk of political violence. And that's why we can't have violence and violent events being used for political purposes. What we need is more rule of law, more of a commitment against all kinds of violence.
Signora Iotolo, abbiamo una blue card.
Mr. Ruotolo, there's a blue card for you. Do you want it? No? Okay.
Madam Aphrodite Latinopoulou.
It is our solemn duty to remind everyone that the left, all over the world, but in Europe as well, has its hands full of blood. Should we remember the RAF in Germany or the Brigate Rosse in Italy or whatever? We know them very well in Greece. We have the murderers of 17 November, or the murderers of Kapelonis and Fundoulis, or the people who murdered 5 people in Marfin Bank a few years ago. Thousands of victims in the name of their ideology. A few weeks ago we had the murder of Quentin in France. Or have we forgotten about the murder of Charlie Kirk in America? The left is demonstrably the Trojan horse of radical Islam in Europe. They support them, they bring them over here, and they give them the right to vote, so that they will have voters. And when they disagree with someone, they murder. They're against the fatherland, religion and family. So all of the extreme left organizations within the EU should be outlawed today. We need to strike at the head of this snake. All of this disease, this cancerous disease of the left, has to be dealt with.
La prochaine intervention, Monsieur Nicolas B.
The next speaker is Mr. Nicolas B. On the 14th of February, Quentin was killed. This young Christian, Patrick, 23 years old, was murdered and kicked on the ground for several minutes by members of the Jeune Garde, the militia from La France Insoumise. Miss Rina Hassan, this is your personal group of guards. So, your security team kicked this man to death. You have blood on your hands, Quentin's blood. Together with all Europeans and French people, we demand that justice be done. Starting with Raphael Arnaud, another member of your group, who is listed as an S on the S list, who's a member of the General Assembly. This violence is an essential part of La France Insoumise project, together with the rest of the ultra-left. The end justifies the means, even if that's violence or indeed death. Support for communist regimes leading to millions of deaths, support for Hamas and Islamic terrorists, and these people are now killing our young. The Jeune Garde and other extreme left militia must be characterised for what they really are, that's to say, terrorist organisations.
Monsieur B, il y a une question.
There's a question, Mr. Bay.
Il y en avait deux. Hein.
So,
and we have from Miss Foro.
C'est bon, je peux?
I would like to speak to the member who's wearing an electronic bracelet. I'd like to know whether he spent his time under house arrest to read up on political violence. I'd like to remind him that 90% of deaths linked to political violence were caused by the extreme right. So, sir, do you condemn those assassinations committed by the extreme right?
Okay, so
you referred to extreme right violence. They're imaginary. You made this up to justify your unjustifiable behaviour. You have been abandoned by the working class in France. They don't vote you for anymore. You are now committed to a death cult effort to destroy a civilization using violence and death. And I'm sure that along your way you'll be constantly causing more violence.
We move to the next speaker, Signore Roberto Vanacci.
Grazie, President.
Thank you, President. The far right, the risk of fascism, the goose steps, and the cordon sanitaire. And who is beating up and setting fire to and assaulting police officers with hammers? It's the left. They say that they defend freedom and democracy and rights, but in reality, they're doing quite something else. Such as part of this room that were investigated for going to Hungary to beat up people who didn't think like them. The case at hand here shows that they are capable of extreme brutality. Here again, there's a perpetrator and a victim. But just like in international politics, Europe of technocracy and this room have a double standard. So the time has come to change Europe. And luckily, today, on the old continent, a new wind is coming.
Next speaker, Madam Ana Miguel Pedro.
Em França, jovem de 23 anos perdeu a vida.
There was a recent attack that was committed by a far-left group. In Italy, far-left groups are attacking the rail networks, paralysing trains and risking people's lives. These are dangers which are cross-border, and no one in this hemicycle should be defending it. It is being promoted by extreme left-wing organisations. They say that they serve noble purposes, but they are using chaos to impose their agenda. The far left is as dangerous as the far right. In fact, they camouflage themselves more effectively than the far right. And what they're doing is an attack on democracy. It doesn't matter where they come from, what flags they bear, or what reasons they use to justify their action. What we cannot accept is that there is condemnation of violence when it comes from one side of the spectrum, but nothing is condemned when it comes from the other side. It doesn't matter what colour of the politics we're talking about, we must always condemn violence when it happens.
Blue card. There are two blue cards. We can only take one, and we will take on the order. Would like to take? No. Okay. So, due to the time, if there are several blue cards, we take only the first one register. So, just for you to know. Demeter Saba, for 1 minute.
Beszéljünk a politikai erőszakosság egy másik ügyéről. Egy héttel ezelőtt.
Thank you, President. I'd like to talk about another case of violence. A week ago, the president of Ukraine threatened the Hungarian president. He said he would send troops to his home. My Austrian colleagues requested an item on the agenda to discuss this, but that was refused. Instead of that, President Zelensky has been given a European decoration for promoting European values. So, following these threats, a Ukrainian politician said that Orban won't be able to hide. He should think about his children and his grandchildren. That's a direct threat to his children. If that isn't an example of crossing a red line, what is? When will we finally recognise what's unacceptable? Where is the limit when it comes to violence and politics? Threats to use force, troops against a president, is not part of European values. That country certainly shouldn't be offered accelerated membership. He should be. We will support our president, and that will, electoral votes will be a democratic response.
Charlie Kirk wird erschossen, Sie verweigern ihm.
There was someone like George Floyd who was shot, but he didn't get a minute of commemoration. Ilaria Salas's immunity wasn't lifted either. There is a lot of violence against the AfD, but you want to ban the AfD. But we have Mélenchon's militia group. That won't be banned. You talk about tolerance, but tolerance for you only goes in one direction. some of your thinking is perverted. You don't convince others with arguments. You have no arguments. So instead you use censorship and violence. I detest you, you from the left, because you have caused death. The death of Catholics and of others. What you are doing in Antifa, in Jeune Garde, there is blood on your hands, the blood of Quentin. You took Quentin away from us, but you have created thousands in his stead.
Mr. Matej Tonin, for 1 minute.
Podpredsednik, kolegice in kolegi, ideologija skrajne levice temelji.
Ladies and gentlemen, the ideology of the extreme left draws on the ideas of Antonio Gramsci, who called for a long march through the institutions. The spilling of blood is, you're replacing spilling blood with undermining institutions and public bodies. This is one of the great problems facing us today, and this is to be linked back to the extreme left. For example, the open the borders slogan you use. You're suggesting we open our borders to millions of illegal immigrants. However, by closing our borders, we made our streets safer. Or you called for the closure of nuclear power stations, an enormous strategic mistake which we're paying a heavy price for. So you're committed to destroying capitalism, and in doing that you'll destroy our economy at the same time. What you're doing won't save the planet, but it will certainly destroy our businesses. I say no to all extremes.
History has shown us that to kill a fascist is not a crime. That's what is shouted at left-wing protests. But fascism died years ago, whereas militant anti-fascism still kills today. In Europe, the cradle of rights and tolerance, paramilitary organisations of the far left roam the streets armed with Molotovs and hammers. They're looking for skulls to smash those who don't match their way of thinking. Isn't it a crime to kill somebody who's 23 years old? Charlie Kirk was killed, and nobody on the left was indignant. But what can we expect from a parliament which gave immunity to a representative who was accused of going with a left-wing organisation to knock people's heads together in Hungary? Nobody here criticised the killing of Charlie Kirk or Quentin, and you are victims of that violence, and you are complicit in that violence.
Madam Petra Steger.
Linksextremismus.
Left-wing extremism kills. When will you finally wake up and become active? It is incomprehensible. You say that you want to protect rights. But if the left does nothing, you are silent. A 23-year-old was murdered in France by those who have links to the European left. Killed. Why? Because he wanted to protect young women. And what is the reaction here? You try to contextualize it and you are silent. What we see by the left is that they burn cars, they plant bombs in Greece, they attack the police in France, and they attack right-wing politicians in Germany. And yet you always try to contextualize this or play it down when it's done by the left. And look, instead at Italia Saris, who went to Budapest and she wanted to beat people up. But we in Austria have a left-wing justice minister who doesn't even know what Antifa is. The left-wing seems becoming more and more extreme, more and more violence, because you play down this violence and you are complicit in all of this.
So also, based on the words said at the beginning, we will forward this intervention to the President. We will move to the next speaker, Monsieur Alexandre Varro.
Black Bloc.
Black Bloc, Jeune Garde, zones to defend. Ultra-left violence permeates the whole of French society. The justification for this is a magic word, Antifa. That explains it all. Physical violence, murder, a refusal to accept democracy and freedom of expression. As well as siamo tutti antifascisti. Whereas in reality, you are the only real fascists in the 21st century. Unfortunately, you aren't alone. We now have parties who are represented in this House who support violence. In France, the Insoumis, of course, but also the socialist and ecologist rabble who also support violence whenever an election looms. They say that democracy is more than just an election. I'm sure that President de Gaulle would be turning over in his grave with people who calling for revolution. For the Insoumis extreme left, violence isn't a problem. It's simply a solution to accede to power.
Next speaker, Juan Carlos Girauta Vidal.
In
2017, Ocupa, a far-left activist, killed Victor Lainez in Zaragoza in Spain. The reason was that he had Spanish flag braces. He had already left a police officer tetraplegic in 2007. He became a hero for the Spanish left. Last September, Tyler James Robinson, an Antifa member, killed Charlie Kirk with a shot to the neck in Utah. A few weeks ago, a mob from Antifa, which should be called a terrorist group, killed Quentin Deranc with bullets to the head. These are just some of the many cases in which the far left has exercised violence. It's always cowardly and based on an imaginary fight against fascism. If I could just paraphrase a companion, they don't want to kill us because we're fascists. They call us fascists so that they can kill us. It's not surprising because the far left has always considered the use of violence legitimate. They know this in the Basque Country, where the left linked to ETA attacks Vox, and that happens as well in Navarra and Catalonia. Every time our party sets up a stand, they experience verbal attacks.
Sorry, Mr. Girauta. Please respect the time that has been allocated to you. Next speaker, Mr. Tiago Moreira de Sá.
President, Commissioner, last month in Lyon, a 23-year-old man, Quentin, was kicked to death by militants of the far left. But the useful idiots of anti-fascism came to reassure us this was just an isolated case, they said, between the far-right militants and left-wing humanists. Nothing special, we shouldn't worry. But historically, the far left has always had this talent of kicking its opponents while charming the naive. But these boots in Lyon didn't appear from nowhere. They're part of a long history of political violence. From the French revolutions to the Bolsheviks, from Trotsky to Stalin, from the Great Leap Forward to Mao's Cultural Revolution, from death camps in Cambodia to today's Antifa. Today they are using their boots to commit violence. They don't want to debate, they want to crush us physically. For them, they're doing what Orwell said. They are driving a boot into humanity, into our human face.
Mr. Oliveira. Would you like to take it? Okay. Mr. Oliveira.
Obrigado, Presidente. Sr. Deputado Tiago Moreira.
Honourable Member, for 48 years there was a fascist regime in Portugal which tortured and killed Democrats and other communists. After the 25th of April, it was the communists who were burned to death and who suffered. And we saw that recently a right-wing militia was dismantled in Portugal. So you are not debating the death of a young person here. You are using this man's death to whitewash your own violence, and you are complicit in this attempt to whitewash your own violence.
You can reply.
You're wrong. I'm not from the Estado Novo. I'm not from the fascist regime. And what about Stalinism and everything that was done in the 20th century?
We didn't. There is a request for a follow-up, and this can be done. Yeah, Mr. Oliveira.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
President.
Obrigado, Presidente.
I want to respond to Mr. Moreira de Sá. Of course, I'm against the death of any young person. Of course. And I think it's deplorable that you are instrumentalizing the death of this young man for political purposes, to politically whitewash. That's what you and the other far-right groups are doing. You don't care about the young man that lost his life. You are cleaning your own conscience. You are shirking responsibility to promote organized violence. And I told you about what's happening in Portugal. Why don't you talk about the actual examples I've mentioned to you in Portugal today? I'm not moralizing, but I don't want to be moralized too. You, of course, are completely virtuous. But if we look at history, we've seen that you're not virtuous at all. And I'd like you to learn your history so that you know what you're talking about.
Erno Schaller Baros.
Tisztelt képviselőtársaim, ülésünk nyitó nap.
Honourable members, colleagues, during the opening sitting this week, the President of the Parliament said the following: "The security of one member state is the security of the whole European Union." We have no idea what the left think about this. To take the case of Hungary, the European Parliament is showing double standards. It's no problem for ultra-left to go out on the streets in Hungary to attack, to belittle, to insult people. Nothing's done about that. We saw the way in which you refused to raise the immunity for Ilaria Salis. The left ignore the fact that our president and his family have now recently been threatened. It's not possible to have a sensible discussion here. Meanwhile, ultra-left organisations murder a 23-year-old drunk Frenchman. We are sick and tired of these double standards, and we're sick and tired of your complicit silence.
And we move to the KGI procedure, and we will do our best to take everyone. The first speaker register on behalf of EPP, Tomislav Sokol.
Nasilje se u neovisnom
In objective mainstream media, violence is always attributed to the right, but the murders of Quentin Derank and Charlie Kirk show that murders often come from the extreme left, also in alliance with Islamist group, and they are the biggest threat to European security and way of life. But the background for this had been set a long time ago. The left is dominating the media. They have a monopoly over the truth, and they tell us what we can and we cannot do. Who does not think like them is dehumanized and is labeled xenophobe and fascist. This has led to mass migration that prevents women from freely walking the European streets, and we have a massive promotion of gender ideology. If we let this continue, this will be the end of European civilization. It is time to say enough.
Next speaker, Juan Fernando López Aguilar.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Desde esta bancada socialista condenamos.
On the left, we condemn all political violence with no exceptions. So it's wrong that violence is just restricted to your own neighbourhood, and we condemn those that apply to us but not to the political opposition. But all the force of the law has to fall on any political violence. But we also have to apply a diagnosis and an analysis. In open societies, political dialogue has become impossible because of social media algorithm-based communication, which incites hatred towards those who are different. And those people who want to change. Women, feminists, progressives, environmental activists. The European Union has a duty to not only try to apply its own laws against incitement of hatred, but also to hold up the business model of the big platforms whose entire point is to incite hatred and political violence. Thank you.
Signora Isabella Tovaglieri.
La violenza rossa è un'emergenza.
Red violence now represents an emergency in Italy and Europe. According to Europol data, in 2024, 21 terrorist attacks were carried out by the extreme left and anarchists. 18 of those attacks were carried out in Italy, the homeland of extreme left, with the complicity of our homegrown left. However, the Europol statistics ignore a whole series of other aggressions which could also be characterized as terrorist attacks. They're equally serious given the intimidation they involved, carried out by these anti-fa groups against anybody who doesn't agree with them. We have an emblematic example here when it comes to the Salis case, who was accused of carrying out a punitive attack on in the Hammer Gang. After the killing of Barbara Kenten, we can no longer turn away when the progressive left here condemns the pacifist ideas of our parties for the right. At the same time, there's no effort to condemn the shameful violence committed by the ultra-left.
Dear Speaker, it's hammer time. Antifa is a terrorist organization. And this House is a terrorist sympathizing spineless creature. You only need to ask MEP Salis, an Antifa activist from the left. She's grateful for your votes to secure her immunity against charges of a violent hammer attack. Let's have a look at the facts. The Europol report states that EU countries faced 24 jihadist terrorist attacks in 1 year. Right after the jihadists come the leftist attacks. Left-wing and anarchist terrorism counted 21 attacks within a year. Then you see here these politicians calling for actions against right-wing, intolerant and extremist speech. What a bunch of hypocrites you are. I call for action against these leftist terrorists. It's time to designate Antifa a terrorist organisation. Thank you.
Mr. Tinkinen, I would remind you that you are part of this House as well. I will refer to the President based on rule number 10 due to the words being used in intervention. We move to the next speaker, Jaume Asens Lodra.
Thank you to the anti-fascists. Thanks to the anti-fascists of the past. You call them terrorists. But thanks to them we can even be here debating freely, even to say stupid things. And some of you want to destroy democracy, saying that you have to ban anti-fascism. We have democracy because anti-fascists defeated fascists. And as a result, we've built European democracy, saying we would never have fascism again. But we in Spain have to give concessions to the fascists so that they accept the rules of the game, so that we can have political parties. That's what's happening with the PP and Vox today. But we had neo-Nazis, Gendongo, Ocupa, and they have all harassed people like Irene Montero and others, and I have solidarity with them today. And two of these neo-Nazis threatened those on the left. So after 40 years of dictatorship, let's not forget that the violence came from the far right.
Mark Botenga.
Monsieur le Président, en Belgique...
President, in Belgium, the parents of Kenzam, in France, Federica and Shem, Angélie Melim, Italy, Abalea Milika. The long list of victims of far-right sympathisers sends a chill down my spine. However, there are actually people who call about imaginary victims. Aren't you ashamed of yourselves? Your only objective here is to turn things on their head, to portray victims as those responsible, as if anti-fascism rather than fascism were the problem. Face up to this. We see across Europe the far right making inroads with its divisive strategies. They try to split the working population. So at the same time, they oppose pay rises, they oppose taxes on millionaires, they oppose controls on rents. Who do they blame it on? Women's rights, immigrants. Meanwhile, these billionaires, Terrain, Musk, finance your activities. You and your billionaire friends should face up to the fact that no passaran, siamo tutti antifascisti.
Malika Sorel.
Ici, au Parlement.
Here in the European Parliament, I was photographed, that was then sent to the media, and it unleashed a wave of racism online. For weeks, my family were scared that I would be attacked in the street. My only fault was that I walked past Rima Hassan. So then I was unfairly accused of working on behalf of Algeria, of being paid by Algeria, a country that I've had no contact with for several years. And they knew what they were doing, because in France, thanks to the War of Independence, there's a lot of tension around people from Algerian origin. There was an investigation opened by the Parliament, and they found all the names of those people, and I hope that actions will be taken and sanctions applied. This Parliament has the duty to set an example.
Thank you. So we conclude with the interventions from the members of the European Parliament. I'd like to thank everyone for respecting the rules and, of course, understanding also the responsibility that each of us has beyond this House. So this being said, I move back to the Commission. Commissioner, you are ready to intervene on behalf of another colleague, if I understood correctly at the beginning. Commissioner.
Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The debate was, how shall I put it, interesting, if that is a diplomatic way to phrase it. Let me maybe start with a cri de coeur, and I'm sure Commissioner McGrath would be okay with that. What I would sincerely hope is that we, particularly on this continent, with our horrible history of political violence, of fascism, communism, Nazism, religious violence, would always unite in condemning any violence, whether it comes from extreme left terrorists, extreme right terrorists, Islamists, or any other corner. Open and free debate simply is core to our democracy. And differences in positions and in opinions are fundamental to the functioning of our democratic institutions. Individual citizens, political candidates and elected representatives must all feel free at all time from threats and acts of violence. A secure and constructive debate, online and offline, empowers citizens to voice their views, their political candidates to enter and stay in politics, and elected representatives to exercise their responsibilities without fear. And each of these is essential to our democracies. So together, with all the differences of opinion we might have, together we must be resolute in protecting and promoting our democracies and their institutions as the guarantor for our European values, our European freedoms, and our European way of life. And that is why, and I mentioned that at the beginning, the European Democracy Shield highlights the need for a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach. And we will continue to update and involve the Parliament throughout its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this debate is closed. We move to the next item on the agenda, which is Commission Statement Situation of the Rule of Law in Greece following the court decision on predator spyware. Commissioner, again, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There I am again. Chair, honourable members, on behalf of my colleague, Commissioner McGrath, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss with you today the rule of law situation in Greece. On the situation of the rule of law in Greece, the Commission's view are actually already set out in a 2025 rule of law report, as for all the Member States. As regards the justice system, major reforms related to the rule of law are being undertaken in dialogue with the Commission and financially supported under the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And these include, for instance, projects to improve the level of digitalisation of justice. Now, following an important reform carried out in 2024, the judiciary was involved in 2025 for the first time in the appointments of the President, Vice Presidents and the Prosecutor General of the Supreme Court. At the same time, the length of court proceedings still raise serious challenges, and efforts are being made to address them. The implementation of recent reforms is encouraging, but it is still early to assess results. Regarding the anti-corruption framework, Greece is developing a common corruption case management register, and that is part of the efforts to improve the track record of prosecutions and final judgments in corruption cases. Other positive developments were noted as regards asset declarations and rules on political party funding. Furthermore, a reorganisation of the police aims to strengthen integrity. When it comes to lobbying, further measures are needed to improve the effective implementation and enforcement of the rules. Regarding media freedom and pluralism, the report notes that the legal framework concerning the right of access to documents has been improved significantly, despite some practical challenges. Also, the transparency of media ownership is strengthened by the continued operation of the registry for print media and the registry for electronic press. A law was adopted, in June 2025, reinforcing, amongst others, the publicity and transparency in the printed and electronic press, editorial independence and institutional safeguards regarding state advertising, byline journalism and copyright protection. Resources of the media regulator have been strengthened as the number of employees has increased, but concerns remain regarding its independence and its funding. There have also been positive developments in the landscape for journalist safety, although here as well challenges do remain. Efforts to improve the protection of journalists continue, in particular as regards the framework against abusive lawsuits. Finally, regarding the system of checks and balances, the positive trend of avoiding expedited legislative procedures continued, and the statutory time frame for public consultations has been observed. Participation and transparency in the lawmaking process could nevertheless be improved. In relation to civil society, the registration framework remains complex and fragmented and could benefit from digital interoperability. There has been limited progress as regards the establishment of a regular and sustained dialogue with civil society organisations. Overall, further measures are needed to simplify the legal framework and foster an enabling environment for CSOs. On the issue of spyware, let me recall the Commission's position. Any attempt to illegally access data of citizens, including journalists and political opponents, is unacceptable. We continue to report on the issue of spyware when appropriate in the annual Rule of Law report from the perspective of checks and balances and that of the protection of our journalists. In 2025, the report noted that a presidential decree aiming at safeguarding the privacy of communications against software tracking has not yet been adopted. The annual reports also refer to the judicial investigations which had cleared Greek state agencies and officials of responsibility for the use of predator spyware. The rule of law reports also refer to the investigation carried out by the independent authorities, notably the Data Protection Authority and the Authority for Communication Security and Privacy. These independent authorities are an integral part of the national system of checks and balances in safeguarding the rule of law, should be able to fulfill their functions independently and have sufficient resources to actually do so. As the debate today touches on the question of the use of modern spyware tools, let me also stress that the EU has a strong legal framework in place to protect citizens against the illegal use of spyware. The data protection and privacy acquis offers comprehensive protection of the confidentiality of communications and users' personal data and terminal equipment when the use of spyware falls within the scope of EU law. The e-privacy directive prohibits the interception or surveillance of communications without the prior consent of the user concerned, subject to limited exceptions. EU data protection law is fully applicable to the process of personal data by private entities. They ensure that personal data is processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. They also limit personal data collection for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes. We must, however, clearly separate the illegal use of spyware from the lawful access to data for law enforcement authorities. When law enforcement authorities use surveillance software for these type of purposes, the law enforcement directive applies. We must also acknowledge matters of national security, which are clearly the responsibility of our member states. It is for member states to define their national security interests and to adopt appropriate measures to protect them. Nevertheless, the case law of the European Court of Justice is clear that threats to national security must not be interpreted overly broadly and that member states must be able to demonstrate them. Furthermore, the legal use of spyware is only acceptable if it is non-discriminatory, justified by an overriding reason of public interest, it has to be proportionate, and in compliance with legal certainty and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Outside of data protection, there are several other relevant legislative instruments. The Directive on Attacks Against Information Systems requires member states to ensure that illegal systems access and legal interception are punishable as a criminal offence in a national criminal law. I'm almost there. The European Media Freedom Act, in particular its Article 4, provides specific safeguards for journalists and their families and sources regarding the use of spyware. As a principle, journalists cannot be spied on for doing their work. Any derogation to this principle is to be duly justified on a case-by-case basis by an overriding reason of public interest, proportionate and subject to a prior authorization by a judicial authority. The Act also entitles every journalist against whom a spyware was used to seek justice with a national court in the respective member states. And these provisions entered into application in August of last year. I'm coming to the end, bear with me. The Cyber Resilience Act, with its core obligations due to start applying on December 11th of 2027, also establishes cybersecurity requirements for market access in the European Union. It will further contribute to reducing the attack surface of hardware and software that spyware is trying to exploit by reducing the overall number of vulnerabilities. Dear Chair, honourable members, thank you very much for your patience. If I had done even more speed reading, I should have done this exactly in time, but I sort of managed to get through. Thank you very much.
Dank u voor de inspanning, commissaris.
Thank you, Commissioner, for trying hard. The next speaker is Mr. Leenaars for the EPP for 2 minutes.
I had the honour of chairing this Parliament's Committee of Inquiry on the abuse of spyware like Pegasus and Predator, and our conclusion was clear. While there is a use for such technology in fighting serious organised crime, we must also recognise the serious challenges it poses for fundamental rights. Illegal spying on journalists, politicians or activists is absolutely unacceptable and a clear attack on the rule of law. And we need a strong legal framework that safeguards fundamental rights and ensures accountability, effective democratic and judicial oversight, as well as accessible remedies for citizens whose rights are violated. Regarding Greece, we called for strengthening of legal safeguards, including improved scrutiny and independent oversight mechanisms, alongside ensuring the independence of the national transparency authorities' leaderships. And the legal framework in Greece at that time was not capable to address the growing capabilities of intrusive surveillance software. However, I also want to say that in Greece at the time we were met with a very constructive government. They met us, they welcomed our delegation with transparency and cooperation. That's something we can certainly not say of all member states we visited. Since then, decisive legislative reforms have strengthened the regulatory framework, reinforced independent authorities protecting privacy and tightened rules for lawful interceptions. Oversight mechanisms have been enhanced to prevent future abuses, and we should welcome this. Crucially, also, judicial proceedings have also delivered results. Investigations led to the convictions of 4 individuals responsible. It was welcomed by organisations like Human Rights Watch as a powerful message and an important step in the rule of law. And let us also protect the rule of law. Judicial proceedings should not be turned into a political battlefield. When political actors attempt to delegitimise court decisions simply because they disagree with them, they undermine the rule of law that they pretend to care about. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Magnatis to come take the floor. You have 1 minute.
President, 4 years ago, the president of PASOK, Nikos Androulakis, began his struggle against the parastate operations of surveillance, and the scandal of this spyware was said to be a myth. But the recent ruling of the court proved that the only myth was the propaganda of the government. These 4 people involved were sentenced, and they have also pointed to new suspects, including for the crime of espionage. The National Intelligence Service was linked to Predator, and a cover-up was also indicated. First of all, there were questions that were not answered. There were interceptions or obstruction of justice. 3, there was slander for people who didn't remain silent. Greece is a country in which the rule of law and institutions have to be respected. It has to be a modern European country, and for that we will continue to struggle both in Greece and in Brussels.
Thank you. Mr. Frakos, speaking for OCR, you have 2 minutes.
We're talking about the rule of law in Greece today. What rule of law, though, when the sister of the Prime Minister says that the Greek Parliament is her backyard, when surveillance of ministers, and the highest court says that this was done by private individuals, but at the first instance it was shown that the investigation by the Parliament said that the witnesses were prepared for their questioning by MPs. We shouldn't forget that in the Tembe crime, the same court had to call Kyriakos Velopoulos to show that the videos of the crime had been manually deleted a few hours after the crime. This should have been revealed by the investigator. However, that investigator was named by the Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, and it was shown that he didn't even remove the videos from the case file. What rule of law can we talk about when the leadership or the top brass of of justice are named by the government. What rule of law are we talking about when we've proven that the spyware, Tembi and all these other scandals have been covered up and that the government is directly involved? There is no rule of law in Greece. Thank you.
Thank you, mevrouw Garcia. U spreekt voor Renew. U heeft 1 minuut.
Ms. Garcia van der Waal, you have 1 minute.
Spyware is in most cases illegal, and we cannot say it loud enough or often enough. And Greek judges have delivered some justice for this illegal use of spyware. And 4 people have been sentenced, and that is real, it is tangible, and we should applaud it. But the fact remains that no high-ranking official in the Greek government has offered any democratic accountability. And the fact remains that protection for journalists in Greece is still the worst in the EU. And the fact remains that the Greek government keeps seeing civil society as a threat. And the fact remains that it still possesses spyware to bully and intimidate journalists, as do other countries in the EU. And I applaud the Greek judiciary, but this sentence is a fork in the road. Do we take the road towards real accountability for the use of spyware? Or do we take this sentence as a pacifier and go back to sleep as if nothing happened? Thank you.
Dank u, mevrouw Strik.
Thank you, Ms. Strick.
The rule of law concerns in Greece go far beyond the spy scandal. Greece suffers from a governing culture of weak accountability and impunity. It dangles at the bottom of European media freedom indexes. Journalists are dragged to court. Trust in the judicial independence is low. And providing life-saving aid is punished, but those who put lives in danger with pushbacks walk free. Just recently, it adopted a law that further criminalises members of registered NGOs, sending a chilling message. Help people in need and you're risking your freedom. So why is the Commission backing down? Where are the systematic infringement procedures and the activation of budget conditionality? I repeat the call of this House in its last resolution on Greece. Defend the EU's values in Greece. Show the people there who continue their fight in this toxic environment that the EU system is on their side and that consequences really do arrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanitis. You have 1 minute.
Commissioner, colleagues, I'm not going to say everything about rule of law. I want to just speak about this specific case. And Tembi is going to be spoken about tomorrow. But 2 weeks ago, as Mr. Lennis said, 4 individuals, 2 Greeks and 2 Israelis, were sentenced to 126 years and 8 months of imprisonment for crimes related to illegal interceptions. The prosecutor gave an exemplary sentence and opened a criminal investigation for espionage involving some or foreign state actors. They followed many people, including Ms. Androulakis, who was a former MEP, and he was the leader of his party at the time. And we think that the centre of responsibility is the Prime Minister's office and Mr. Mitsotakis. It wasn't just about journalists and political figures. We want to know who was at the head of this. So, the courts did what they could, because the majority in Parliament covered up and protected their ministers to prevent them from going to court. It was a total cover-up. What can we say about rule of law in Greece? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tsiodras. You have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, the opposition in Greece is trying to use the Parliament's step against the government itself. The case of rule of law is not something that can be achieved by the loud shouts of the opposition, but rather by the investigative committee, which shows the very serious steps that have been taken over recent years in terms of justice, fighting corruption, strengthening transparency. Greece has been one of the member states that has made the most progress in this respect. Recently, the courts have applied a very serious sentence to these 4 individuals, and some doubt that Greek justice works. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, it seems that we've seen the proof that there was no involvement of state actors. We applaud the ruling, and we don't doubt the functioning of rule of law. This is something that comes from the courts, not from political parties. The Greek state has dealt with this with the proper seriousness that it is owed, and has taken the steps to imprison those responsible. The Prime Minister has followed all the correct steps. It has cracked down on illegality at every level. Thank you.
Mr. Hayder, you have 1 minute, please.
President, Commissioner, in July 2022, it became apparent to the European Parliament that there had been an attempt to tap the phone of our former colleague, Nikos Androulakis, so to tap his phone with Predator. This was part of a far-reaching network of illegal surveillance of journalists, opposition politicians, the judiciary and the military. And there was a long fight to get answers, but we have been blocked. We have not had the right answers. How can it be that those who brought the spy software into the country are judged in a court, but those who used the software are not being judged? We had an investigative committee on the illegal use of spyware, and the Parliament has said to the Commission, you must act because the current framework does not suffice. Now is the time, finally, to act.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the illegal use of spyware represents a severe attack on our democracy, human rights and civil rights. It's a good thing that a verdict has finally been handed down, which does create a certain degree of justice. However, the situation is unsatisfactory. I am sick and tired of this. For years now, we've gone through the committee of inquiry. We've discussed this time and time again in the European Parliament. The Commission still hasn't put forward a new legal framework. We know more or less what happened in Greece. We've no idea where else in Europe spyware might have been used secretly so as to undermine our democracy and rights. The time really has come for the Commission to finally act. So, Commissioner, I know you're not responsible for this, but the time really has come for the Commission to put forward a legal framework to defend our countries from illegal spyware.
Vous avez 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
Que s'est-il passé en Grèce?
What happened in Greece? The Conservative government of Mitsotakis used Predator, a spyware that was developed by Intellexa, an Israeli company. They used it on journalists and political opponents illegally. These journalists wanted justice, but they have faced slaps. Predator is like Pegasus, and it is extremely intrusive. It downloads your content. It puts an illegal camera on your phone. That's what the software can do. The Greek government has violated fundamental rights and the rule of law, and the Commission seems to have missed the boat. There was an investigative committee, but 5 years afterwards there's been nothing, no regulation of this software and spyware which threatens our safety and European democracy. Instead, the European Commission is undoing our rules because of the pressure exerted by big tech and Trump. And because of that, these things continue. The Greek justice has acted, but we need and are going to have a new investigation. So I turn to the Council and to the Commission saying we finally need rules. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, after the vote against my country in 2024 and the deep concerns about threats to democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights, we're back here again today to talk about the illegal spyware predator in Greece. This discussion is not just about a judicial case, it's a deep wound at the heart of our democracy. The recent ruling proves that in Greece there is a dark surveillance mechanism following journalists, politicians and simple citizens. Since 2022, Predatorgate could just be a domestic issue, but at the same time, it's one of the most serious tests of the rule of law in the European Union. On behalf of Nikki, we think that the rule of law is not a theoretical term. It should be a refuge for citizens against the arbitrary use of power. That's why I put this to the Libe Committee and I put this to the plenary. We want a binding European framework to regulate spyware and an international investigation into it. The Greek citizen doesn't want a prison guard state that surveys them. They want a guarantor state that they can respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Breza. Please come forward. You have a minute and a half.
Szanowni Państwo.
Thank you very much, dear President, dear colleagues. We expected the PIS politicians to be here. We wanted Mr. Wąsik to take the floor. Today he is a member of the parliament. He used to be a minister responsible for surveillance of many people, including myself, when I was in charge of the campaign in 2018, the campaign of the opposition. 90,000 messages were stolen and doctored and manipulated. The victims were journalists, politicians, activists, everyone who was trying to watch what the government was doing. Poland and Hungary were deprived by Israel of the right to use this spyware. Paradoxically, those people who were convicted back then for illegal surveillance, today they are ECR members of the parliament. A few years ago, they were in prison. Today, of course, there are many legal proceedings, judicial proceedings in course, and we can only be hopeful. There was the PEGA committee. We are hopeful that the system will improve. All the phones can be hacked, and all the phones, everyone's phone, contains a lot of data. Officials cannot have access to the data, to the private data of the citizens. Such data cannot be leaked to external servers. That's a crime against democracy. Thank you.
Mr. Rutolo, you have 1 minute, please.
La sentenza di Atene.
Thank you. The verdict handed down in Athens is an important legal victory. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the victims of this spying, the journalists and the leader of PASOK, who took their battle to the European Court of Human Rights. National security can't become a free-for-all when it comes to the rule of law. Politicians, activists, journalists. We now know that at least 37 European journalists have had their phones infected with spyware over the last 5 years. The judiciary just confirmed the use of spyware against Francesco Castellanto, a French journalist. We discovered that the government had been involved. This is why the European Parliament set up an interest group focusing on the use of spyware with members from different political groups. This is not a party political battle. The use of spyware can be legitimate to fight against terrorism or crime. However, the use of spyware against people who are exercising their fundamental rights has no link to national security. Commissioner, when will you be coming out with the recommendations stemming from the Pegasus inquiry? Thank you.
Mr. Nicolau Alvanos, you have 1 minute, please.
With the sentencing of 4 businessmen about the Predator case, we have shown that we need to bring to light the political and criminal responsibilities for all of these open cases of interceptions for politicians, military, journalists and former MEPs. The New Democracy government is continuing to cover up and silence the case about the interceptions of the telephone line of the Greek Communist Party. We need to put in the dock those reactionary forces who have created this culture, and the current government and the previous Syriza PASOK one, who used the EU's rule of law dogma to say that everybody is susceptible to being listened to. We need a strong EU regulation on the buying and selling of this spyware, which only works to the detriment of people's rights. And the Greek Communist Party is the only party that stands by the side of the people in this case.
Belarus. You have 1 minute, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, respect for the rule of law is the basis of the proper functioning of the member states and the EU. These illegal interceptions has resulted in the government taking a very severe approach. These steps have been recognised by the report of the European Commission on the rule of law. Greece is making constant progress and correcting chronic dysfunction. But that's not all. Recent developments in the Predator case have proven that institutions work. We have applied harsh sentences, and the Supreme Court decided that there was no involvement of government officials. I think it's unacceptable that we are interpreting these sentences and rulings according to our political convenience. The institutions work in Greece and the rule of law is fully implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Laurent. Vous avez 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame.
President, Commissioner, imagine just for a moment your phone, your private life, your exchanges, all spied on without your knowledge. It sounds like a film or fiction, but that is Predatorgate, the reality of Predatorgate in Greece, which affected journalists and political opponents. The government has tried to silence the affair, but civil society and journalists and those affected have fought back. The Athens court has ruled, and this is an important step, but it won't be enough without structural reforms. 3 years ago, the PEGA committee sounded the alarm bell and asked for a strict framework for the use of spyware. The committee also looked at the abuse and asked to end the silence of the industry. But nothing happened with these recommendations. When will the Commission finally act? When will it put forward a European framework protecting the fundamental rights of all citizens? It is time for action. Protecting our freedoms can no longer wait.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Going to the catch the eye procedure, starting with Mr. López Aguilar, 316.
Thank you, President. Comisario.
Commissioner, this debate isn't just about focusing on this scandal involving a massive use of the Predator spyware in Greece, involving a former member of the European Parliament and the current head of PASOK, our colleague Kyriakis Mitsotakis. This also pertains, of course, to the ongoing work of the Pegasus investigation by the Commission. The European Parliament set up a committee of inquiry, and the conclusions of that inquiry should have been binding on the Commission. It was quite clear this spyware permitted a massive and intrusive surveillance of personal communication. It wasn't part of the fight against organised crime or terrorism. On the contrary, this spyware was used to identify lawyers, journalists, and a series of people who the authorities weren't comfortable with. That's in violation of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. So we're still waiting for those conclusions to be acted on and implemented by the Commission. Thank you.
2110.
Dear Speaker, Europe was built on the values of democracy and human rights, not on the values of China. European values include the right to privacy and the protection of personal communication. With the European Commission pushing for chat control in its different versions, this right has been under attack. Before, we used to send letters and engage in conversations, but the digital evolution has dramatically changed the idea of how we communicate with each other. It is imperative that conversations in the online space are protected just as strongly as traditional methods. We have technology that allows this, such as end-to-end encryption. These must be enforced, not weakened by the politicians. It is our job to make sure that privacy is protected. That's why I say no to chat control. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minchev, 139.
Thank you very much, Madam President, dear Mr. Commissioner, dear colleagues. The predator conviction is welcome, but justice that goes no further than the foot soldier is no justice, is damage control. Those who pursued accountability were sidelined, and questions of government involvement left deliberately unanswered. This raises a fundamental European question. Can abuses of surveillance powers happen without real consequences? Across the Balkans, we see similar concerns. In Bulgaria, the European Court on Human Rights has already warned that the surveillance framework built in the last couple of years is wide open to abuses. Even if the next elections bring a reformist majority, undoing the damage will take years. None of this is abstract. Viktor Orban was shielded for years, and the price tag of this is a leader taking Ukraine's survival hostage to hold on to power. Colleagues, history will not be kind to those who choose party affiliation over democratic principles. Accountability or convenience. Europe is watching. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Zakaria, 847, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Commissioner, there was the discovery of predator being used in a conspiracy with the Greek intelligence services, which comes under the Prime Minister's office. They obstructed investigation, and there was manipulations of the Parliament. However, the court took their decision and they reopened the file for investigation into espionage. Apart from the 90 targets, there were included MEPs, including EP communications and the ministers for defence and foreign affairs at the time. If Spyware can surveil somebody who sits at the top table of the EU, it could intercept the EU itself. So this is opening us up to potential infiltration by foreign services. Europol and the European Data Protection Supervisor need to investigate the case at the European level, and the Commission needs to tell us what actions they will take. Thank you.
Thank you, meneer commissaris Hoekstra. Het is uw beurt, zou ik het zo zeggen.
Over to you again, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And the lavish speaking time I took in the first round, I'm going to compensate by being relatively brief now. I want to thank the members of this House for a truly very good and interesting debate. The Commission monitors the rule of law situation in all Member States, let me reiterate that one more time, through a regular and dialogue-based process. As evidenced in the 2025 Rule of Law report, Greece has advanced in many reforms. And yes, further steps can be taken to progress in the implementation of the report's recommendations. What the Commission does is closely cooperating with the Greek authorities, including by providing technical assistance in some areas. Dialogue with the Commission, in our view, is a very important part of this process, and it must be matched by concrete results on the ground. The Commission will continue to monitor relevant developments concerning the rule of law in Greece in the context of the annual Rule of Law report. And it was just last week that the Commission concluded the country visit to Greece in preparation of the 2026 report. And in this visit, the Commission met with a wide variety of stakeholders, including public authorities, independent authorities, civil society, and journalists. So let me conclude by assuring you that the Commission shares the commitment of this House, as was articulated in the debate, to uphold the rule of law in all EU member states, of course, including Greece. We will continue to work closely with the European Parliament to ensure progress in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The debate is now closed. The next item on the agenda is Commission statement, Accessible EU and the Strategy for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, State of Play and the Future of EU Accessibility Policy. Commissaris Hoekstra.
Thank you, Chair. It is me again. This time on behalf of my colleague, Commissioner Labib. And on her behalf, I would like to thank you for bringing to the agenda the importance of promoting accessibility in our societies and in our economies, and the concrete contribution of the accessible